Disney has been fooling you for decades. He simplified, turned deep ancient stories filled with harsh realities of life into pink plastic with sparkles. We grew up with a happy picture of a kiss of eternal love without thinking about the fact that it happened without mutual consent. We hated the evil queen, not knowing that Snow White's father was no better than her, and much more. If you dig deeper into the real stories about Snow White without censorship, cold-blooded murders, cannibalism, incest, black magic, and other creepy details of the fairy tale, as it was before Disney and even before the Brothers Grimm, unexpectedly emerged from the darkness of centuries. Today, we'll reveal some of the hidden meanings of the fairy tale as well as tell its darker versions. Done? Then let's dive into the dark waters of the past. Disney's version aside, we mostly know the story of Snow White thanks to the Brothers Grimm, who published the tale in 1812. But the plot in which the girl caused the death of her evil stepmother actually has much deeper roots, which grow from the gloomy and sycophantic folklore of medieval Europe. This plot was taken by Grimm as the basis of the story. In general, the brothers liked to rummage through the stories of ancient times in search of ideas, including studying the fairy tales of deceased authors in order to pull a few tidbits of plot from there. Once upon a time, there lived a king and a queen, and the ideal in the story ends with this traditional phrase, because in fact the king was madly in love with his beautiful wife, and among all women he saw only her. And this love, from the point of view of modern psychology, would be called a toxic love addiction. One winter day, the pregnant queen was sitting by the window and embroidering. Looking at the snow outside the window, she pricked her finger with a needle. Putting her hand outside the window in the black ebony frame, the woman watched as 3 red drops of blood fell on the snow and wished that she would have a baby with skin as white as snow, lips as red as blood, and hair as dark as ebony. Quite a strange desire, don't you think? Also, caused by spilled blood. Maybe that's why the whole subsequent story is really based on blood. Blood ties, blood images, blood magic, and blood revenge. When the couple had a daughter who was named Snow White, she was exactly as her mother had wished, but the young queen died during childbirth. Of course, in the time of the Brothers Grimm, women in childbirth had a much higher chance of dying than they do now, so there's nothing surprising in this plot twist. But we're talking about a fairy tale now, aren't we? While pregnant, the queen made a wish, painting in blood on a snow-white canvas. So it's quite possible that the universe heard the poor woman's wish and decided to grant it. Of course, in its own perverted way, in a word, be afraid of your desires, because you'll have to pay dearly for them, especially if you're the character of a fairy tale. In the Brothers version, it's not known how the king experienced the loss, but in some other variations, he was inconsolable. For days, he sat in front of the portrait of his dead wife and allowed only a faithful servant in Snow White, who reminded him of her mother, into his rooms. If so, why did he decide to remarry? Everything's very simple. Judging by the plot we have, Snow White's mother passed away without giving birth to a boy, the heir to the throne. Therefore, no matter how much the king fought for his beloved, the status and duties before the kingdom required the monarch to marry again. Not long after, he met Snow White's stepmother, beautiful in appearance but evil and black at heart. The king had more than a wide choice, but he chose that woman, and hardly because he liked her. The new queen was a witch, so it's safe to conclude that she won over her future husband with charms. From the very first day, the queen stepmother disliked Snow White, according to the official version, because of the girl's beauty. The newly made queen stepmother had a very special mirror which she brought with her from distant lands. That mirror could talk and always told the truth. Every morning, the queen stepmother went to the mirror and asked if she was the most beautiful woman in the world, and every morning it invariably confirmed those words. But there's a more prosaic explanation for this hatred. The newly married couple never had their own child, according to the plot. It can be assumed that this is due to the fact that, despite all the charms, the king paid more attention to his daughter and not to his new wife. As we know, the impossibility of continuing the family used to be blamed on the woman, and it's unlikely that the queen was satisfied with this state of affairs. Years passed. Snow White grew up and became more and more beautiful and more like her late mother. The stepmother seemed to notice that the king's attention to her daughter was growing. In their fairy tale, the Brothers Grimm delicately ignored the moment that the father began to look at Snow White not as a daughter, but as a woman. his late wife with addictive lust and passion. And the caustic jealousy of a neglected woman was added to the stepmother's instinctive hatred of her stepdaughter. And there's no need to be horrified. How could it be? He's her father. What jealousy? This is incest. Believe it or not, in the history of royal marriages, there was more than one such case when the king married his own daughter. The Indian king Shah Jahan, the one who built the famous Taj Mahal in memory of his late wife, later married his daughter Jahanara, who in adulthood became very similar to her mother Mumtaz. Doesn't it remind you of anything? It's known for certain that even the pharaohs of Egypt often married their own daughters. In fact, Ramesses II married even 4 of his daughters, and Amenhotep III married 2, Cinnamon and Iset. So, as bad as it sounds, it was normal for those times. And as for Snow White's age, because, she's still quite a child. In the European royal families of the Middle Ages, it was not surprising at all when little girls became royal brides and wives. In Britain, it was Isabella of Valois who was married in 1396 at the age of 6. Eleanor of Castile married at the age of 10 to Edward I of England in the 13th century. In Germany, in the 16th century, there was Barbara of Brandenburg-Ansbach, who was given in marriage to royalty at the age of 8. But let's return to the fairy tale. One morning, when the girl was about to turn 7 years old, in response to stepmother's next question about her beauty, the mirror answered her that she was beautiful. But young Snow White was 100 times more beautiful than her. Stepmother was mad. She hit the mirror with her fist, but it didn't break. It just burst with gloating laughter. From that moment on, there was no peace for stepmother until she figured out how to get rid of her stepdaughter. She called her faithful hunter, who was ready to do anything for his mistress, in order to take the princess further into the forest, kill her there, mutilate her, and bring back her liver and lungs. Sometime closer to the evening, under the pretext of wanting to show the girl some fox cubs, the hunter took Snow White far into the forest. And here's the question. How is a 7-year-old girl not afraid to go to the forest in the evening alone with an unfamiliar adult? Or she already knew what could happen and was not afraid of it because she probably already had some experience. Was she completely naive and stupid? Who knows? Later, according to the tale, the hunter took pity on the child who asked for mercy and let her go. But who would believe such a story, that the cold-blooded killer, the queen's favorite, just got so emotional and let the poor girl go? In fact, when the hunter pinned the girl against a tree and was about to disembowel her, he was overcome with lust. Pretty Snow White naively begged for mercy. Her eyes were frightened, her hair was a mess. Her snow-white skin peeked out from under her torn dress. Why not have some fun before I kill, thought the hunter. No one will know about it anyway. But it's impossible. Snow White was only 7 years old. You should remember that the Middle Ages were a dark time, and the question of the age at which girls could be married off was also very vague. The principles of morality and what is allowed and what is not were completely conditional in those days. So, what happened happened. And perhaps if the hunter in the dark wood hadn't done it, her own father would have eventually done it, as he saw her more and more as his longed-for late wife with each passing day she grew up. Or maybe it has already happened, which we certainly don't know. Having finished the matter, the hunter really took pity on the wretched poor thing and let her go, being sure that anyway, wild animals would quickly hunt and eat her. On the way to the castle, he shot a young boar, cut out its heart and lungs, and took it to the queen mother. Do you think she just looked at them and was glad that her stepdaughter was no longer in this world? Yes, of course. But this was not enough for the witch. She ordered the cook to make a roast from them and had a delicious dinner with it. But was it purely a gastronomic act? In many ancient cultures and cults, it was customary to eat some organs of one's enemy in order to take their best features. But stepmother was a witch. So she prepared the dish in advance and, eating parts of Snow White's flesh, thought that she would take away her incredible beauty. For company, she fed that roast to the king and was perversely disgusted watching him eat his own daughter. But, standing in front of the mirror in the morning, she did not see the expected effect and realized that these were not the organs of her hated stepdaughter. It's scary to even imagine what she did with the hunter after that, but knowing the traditions of ancient times, an eye for an eye, and knowing exactly what he did, we can assume that there was some castration. Meanwhile, Snow White, shocked and exhausted in a torn dress, first ran, then walked, and finally barely dragged her feet, making her way through the dark, scary forest. Already on the night of final exhaustion, the girl finally found a meadow on which she stood a small stone hut, the door of which was open. Exhausted, cold, and hungry, Snow White pounced on the food and drink that were on the table in the house and only then looked around. The hut had a table with 7 chairs around it, a large fireplace, and 7 small beds that were just about her height. Exhausted by long insomnia and fear, Snow White laid down on one of them and fell fast asleep. That's how she was found by the 7 mining dwarves, into whose hut she broke so unceremoniously. At first, they were terribly angry because Snow White left them without dinner. The dwarves tried to wake up this insolent, filthy girl and finally gave up in vain and went to bed hungry. Knowing the true nature of this tribe, one can only guess what they decided in the morning. What exactly was wrong with those dwarves? Let's reject the bright image of dwarfs imposed by Disney, cute little rosy-cheeked men who gladly helped the girl to save herself from sudden death. According to demonology, dwarves are spirits of the earth, and in the ancient folklore traditions of various peoples, they're by no means kind to people. They are ugly, greedy, treacherous, and cruel. In many beliefs, including Scandinavian ones, dwarves are dark elves. In British, dark fairies. So what kind of joy did they have to hide a person in their house so foolishly? We can assume that the dwarves agreed to give Snow White shelter and care for her as part of their family only under 2 conditions. Either it was the wishes of the dwarves themselves, or Snow White offered some payment option for her stay. But we have what we have. From the fairy tale, we see that Snow White spent her entire life in the dwarf's hut. She cleaned, cooked, and did laundry. That is, in fact, she became a servant for the dwarves. This was the first condition. But sexual slavery was also added to this. Where does this conclusion come from? According to legends, dwarfs, in addition to all their other qualities inherent in dark creatures, are very grounded and, in addition to greed, have other enhanced basic primary instincts: gluttony and lust. These 7 lived together. They plowed hard in the mine, liked to gorge, drink a glass or 2, and were hardly eunuchs. Therefore, nothing animal was strange to them. And again, the age of the female person did not play a role. Besides, she was the same height as them. The youngest of the dwarves probably benefited the most from the appearance of Snow White, who, due to the absence of women, was regularly forced to help her roommates satisfy their sexual desires. Could it be true? It could. Because 7 sexually mature dwarves lived together without women. In the same Middle Ages, public opinion was dominated, fixed by the postulates of the church and the harsh condemnation of sodomy that any man who's not in a relationship with a woman is either completely devoid of masculinity or is actually a homosexual. Even in 2004 in Chicago, when Marshall Field's chain department store took the theme of Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs for its holiday company, it received a certain number of complaints that it promoted a homosexual lifestyle. Nevertheless, the princess stayed to live with the dwarves who, when she told them her sad story, ordered her to be careful and strictly forbade her to let strangers into the house. But judging by everything that happened next, the princess was not very smart. Because as soon as the queen's stepmother realized that the huntsman had not killed her stepdaughter, she rushed to the mirror, which again informed her that Snow White was the most beautiful in the world and that she was alive, and also found shelter with the dwarves. The displeased witch howled in anger. 3 times she tried to kill the stepdaughter. For the first time, disguised as a merchant, she came to the hut and offered Snow White to try on a beautiful woven silk belt. The woman pulled it so hard that Snow White couldn't even take a breath and fell on the floor as if dead. Fortunately, when the dwarves found the stupid girl on the floor, they saw a beautiful and expensive belt. One of the dwarves pulled it from Snow White. Well, what's the point of losing a good thing? And miraculously, at the same moment, she took a deep breath and regained consciousness. The second time, the queen used the poisoned comb, and again the dwarves saved the girl, who did not realize that it's dangerous to take things from strangers. Why did stepmother always do it herself? Were there no other servants who could do her dirty work for the queen? Perhaps after the disappointment with the hunter, she didn't want to risk it again. Moreover, the people hardly loved her very much. She never gave the king offspring, and if one of the mercenaries had spoken about the fact that the beautiful princess, the only heir to the throne, was alive, the queen would have been screwed. So, for the third time, enraged by failure, the queen cut her hand and poured blood into the magic cauldron. After that, she uttered a black spell. Taking a small apple, dipped it into the cauldron. When she got it out of there, it turned into the most delicious apple in the world. Big, blood red, and juicy. This time, the queen's stepmother decided to be more cunning. She cast a spell on the apple so that only half of it was full with the deadly poison. Transforming into a peasant woman, she put the poisoned apple in the basket and went to her stepdaughter. Although Snow White did not let the friendly peasant into the house, she could not resist the incredible red apple, which seemed to glow from the inside and invited her to bite its ruddy side. And the peasant woman, in order to prove to the princess that everything was fine with the apple, was the first to bite off a good piece of it. So, without too much fear, the girl leaned over the windowsill and took a bite of a piece of the apple. At the same moment, she fell dead, and the satisfied witch threw herself on a flock of black birds and flew to the castle. And no matter how carefully the dwarves examined Snow White, no matter how they looked in all the places where any magical and deadly object could be hidden, they found nothing. The girl remained dead. And the queen's stepmother, standing in front of the enchanted mirror, laughed with a predatory, evil laugh, hearing that she was the most beautiful in the whole kingdom. It's interesting that the apple itself was the tool that managed to poison the princess. This fruit appears repeatedly in myths and legends. In some cultures, it's a symbol of life and longevity, but most of the time, on the contrary, it's associated with something sinister. With temptation, accepting which the hero exposes himself and others to terrible danger. Despite the fact that the Bible does not directly mention it, it is traditionally believed that the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden was the apple. Also, together with the consolidation of the influence of Christianity in Europe, this association led to the fact that the apple became a symbol of temptation, sin, and the fall of humanity. It's not surprising that this image smoothly moved into our fairy tale where Snow White, despite the dwarf's prohibition, accepts the apple from the stepmother's hands, just as Eve, despite God's prohibition, obeys the snake and plucks an apple from the tree. While the dwarves were deciding what to do with the poor thing, several days passed, and despite the fact that it was summer outside, her body did not show the slightest signs of decay. The girl was lying in the coffin as if she were alive. Her lips were red. Her cheeks were rosy. The dwarves are thrifty people. It's a pity for them to bury such beauty. Yes, probably everyone had special memories associated with her. There were no men's magazines then, so they came up with an ingenious idea. They made a transparent crystal coffin and put the princess in it. The coffin was transparent from all sides so that you could admire her from all possible angles. Here's the real reason why the coffin's crystal, and not some other. For years, Snow White lay in a coffin and did not change at all, only growing little by little, turning into a young girl. How is that possible? Is the coffin somehow magical? The explanation here can be quite simple. The girl did not die, but fell into a coma. This term comes from the Greek word coma, which means deep sleep, and is found in the collection of Hippocrates. European doctors also studied this condition, trying to solve the problem in the way they used to solve any problems, by bloodletting. Meanwhile, the medieval ignorant people were quite capable of magical interpretation of such an incomprehensible, mysterious long dream, and at some point it turned into a fairy tale, which we're discussing with you today. By the way, both the crystal coffin and the beauty who lays in dead sleep and remains as if alive were borrowed by the Grimm brothers from the tale of the Neapolitan storyteller of the 17th century, Giambattista Basile. So, in general, everything was much more violent, but the brothers decided to delicately leave behind some things that were too strong, such as a man who was attracted to little girls and his sadistic wife. But let's return to the plot. One day, the prince was passing near the dwarf's hut, and he was caught there by a fierce storm. He asked the dwarves for the shelter and saw the beautiful Snow White. This is where the most interesting thing begins. Seeing the dead girl in the coffin, the prince began to persuade the dwarves to give her to him and offer to pay any amount for her and give all the gold in the world, as he seemed to have fallen in love and he couldn't live without her for a day. A young man begged a coffin with a dead girl inside. No comments. But who could have thought to write such a thing in a children's fairy tale? Where did such an idea come from? It's pure perversion. Well, Perversion, yes, but not a figment of the imagination. And to confirm that, you and I will once again have to return to the Dark Ages, dear to us. For example, the Judean king Herod I, who lived before our era, embalmed the body of a girl he passionately desired, who decided that she would rather kill herself than marry him, and kept her body next to him in his bedroom for 7 years. One can only imagine what he did with her there. In the Europe of the 15th century, which is already closer to us, historians state frequent facts of intimacy with the dead among supporters of the English heretical Lollard movement. And in France, around the same time, the trial of Baron Gilles de Rais thundered loudly. He was a sorcerer and pervert who kidnapped children, conducted magical experiments on them, and entered into relationships with their dead bodies. Believe it or not, in some regions of Central Europe until the 19th century, it was considered normal that if the bride died before the wedding day, the husband could still perform the rite of the first wedding night. But let's return to our story. The dwarfs refused at first, but then took pity on the pervert who had a desire for the dead princess, scratched their beards, and gave him a coffin. Then it's even more fun. The prince dragged the coffin to him in the castle and put it on the bed next to him. This is not the case with the Grimm in the fairy tale, but in other more ancient tales, the events developed in this way. But that's not all. Do you remember when we mentioned the issue of age in relationships in the Middle Ages? Let's count. Snow White was taken to the dwarves at the age of 7 and lay dead in a coffin for several more years. According to some accounts, 4 years, according to others, 7 years. That is, she was either 11 or 14 years old at that time. No matter how long it was, she was still a minor, so our prince was inflamed with ardent passion and brought home a dead child. He spent night after night with the dead Snow White and did not want to look at living women. And somehow it was necessary to get married to give birth to descendants of the throne. One day, his faithful servant finally lost patience. He pulled the princess out of the coffin by her braids, and from the shock, a piece of poisonous apple fell out of her mouth, and Snow White came to life. No kisses of true love for you. Pure calculation and good old-fashioned violence. We don't know whether the prince was happy with a living woman or not, but as a decent man, he should have married after everything that happened between them. Snow White also invited the queen's stepmother to the wedding. And where, you may ask, did the king go? In the fairy tale, his further fate is unknown to us, but we can assume that after another failure of the plan to kill her stepdaughter, the queen killed her husband in order to somehow amuse herself. So, having received the invitation, she put on the jeweled dress and, for the first time in many years, stood in front of the magic mirror. To her dismay, it revealed the stunning truth that the young bride was 1,000 times more beautiful, and the queen decided to go to the wedding to see if it was true. When the woman entered the ceremonial hall and saw the bride, she immediately recognized Snow White and was petrified with fear. Some versions delicately tell us that here she died of shock because her heart could not take it. But would such a wicked and cold-blooded killer die so easily? Other versions of the fairy tale tell us that Snow White, who after severe trials ceased to be a naive flower, even at the stage of sending the invitation, decided to take revenge on her offender. With all the prince's wealth at her disposal, she paid the dwarves to help repay the witch. The queen's stepmother was captured and delivered to the 7 dwarves, who bound her in heavy, unbreakable chains. They led her down to the deepest dungeons of their minds, where they forged a pair of steel shoes just for her. White hot, they were put on the witch's feet, and the last thing the evil queen did in her life was a mad dance in the convulsions of death. And the dwarves and Snow White watched that dance, tasting beer and remembering the riotous times spent together in their hut. Such a not at all children's story was the basis of that emasculated fairy tale that we are all used to. Because in fairy tales, real fairy tales, born in the shadowed depths of ancient times, everything was as ambiguous as life itself, save for the magic and mythical creatures. Stay with us as we continue uncovering the dark, hidden meanings behind these famous tales. Like this video and subscribe to the channel. See you on the other side of history.